The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lisa White, CML's Membership Services Manager, and it's a pleasure to have you here today to participate in our webinar this afternoon. Those of you that are elected officials who have registered, you will receive one university training credit, and we are recording this presentation, so we're going to post that probably sometime tomorrow on CML's website at cml.org under training materials. We also have the PowerPoint presentation saved there as well if you just wanted to refer to those slides. If you're not familiar with the webinar format, you should see a control panel to the top right of the screen. You have an orange arrow to the left of the panel which will minimize the entire box. All of you will be muted for the webinar, but we encourage you to ask questions by typing them into the question box on the control panel. We will be taking questions at the end. Feel free to type those in whenever, but we will take those questions at the end. So allow me to introduce you to our presenters today. Ann Watts is the Community Access Team Manager and Private Activity Bonds Program Manager for the State of Colorado, Department of Local Affairs, Division of Housing. She has 25 years experience in affordable housing development, finance, and technical assistance. At the Department of Housing, she manages home modification and housing voucher programs that keep people with disabilities in their communities and out of nursing homes by making their homes affordable, safe, and accessible. She oversees and tracks Colorado's entire private activity bond allocation and provides technical assistance to local issuers to ensure that the state's PABs are as fully utilized as possible. Prior to the Department of Housing, she was the City of Fort Collins Affordable Housing Planner and has worked as a nonprofit developer in her hometown of Rochester, New York. She has a master's degree in City and Regional Planning from Rutgers University. We also have Karen Harkin. She is the Community Relationship Manager for the Western Slope for the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, or Chafa. She is responsible for marketing and technical assistance for affordable rental housing and small business lending for 22 counties in western Colorado. She was previously the Director of Home Finance for Chafa. After a brief hiatus and relocation to Grand Junction via Pennsylvania, she rejoined Chafa in 2015 in the Community Development Division. With over 30 years of experience in affordable housing, Karen was recognized with a Lifetime Achievement Awards by Housing Colorado and the Colorado Mortgage Lenders Association. So clearly you are in great hands with folks who know exactly what we're talking about here. And at this time, I'm going to turn it right over to Ann.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Why don't we dive right into the first slide. Thanks for that introduction.
Sure.
So we always like to start with the basics. Private activity bonds are a financing tool, but they are not actually cash. So much of what DOLA gets to work on are grant and loan programs where we actually get to write all our local government friends checks for great projects that they're working on. That is not how the private activity bond program works. So what it is authority to issue a special kind of tax-exempt bond, particularly for privately developed projects. There's a limited amount allowed in IRS regulations, so we often refer to private activity bond cap or capacity. Since it's limited, we need to make sure we stay within that amount. Municipalities or authorities, like housing authorities, issue the bonds, but don't have any direct obligation to repay investors. Investors buy the bonds, underwriters use their money or bond proceeds to make a loan to the project, and then the project pays back the loan and investors get repaid with interest. And since it is tax exempt, that is a lower interest rate than it might normally be in an open market kind of loan product. The other really important thing about private activity bonds in the context of affordable rental housing is that it makes them eligible for a 4% low-income housing tax credit. And I know Karen will talk a little bit more about that in her presentation. But I want to start just with explaining the methodology by which we get this resource out to local communities. We have a per person amount allocated by the IRS, and I'm going to apologize right now for a typo I now see in my slide. This always happens. We're at $105 per person.
I couldn't have caught that one, Anne.
No,
Sorry.
you couldn't have. Thanks. You caught others, but not that one. But that's the primary reason. It's a per capita allocation. So from 2017, we had 554 million available statewide. That jumped up to 588, almost 89 million in 2018, thanks mostly to the change from $100 to $105. So according to state statute, half of that allocation goes to statewide authorities. Chafa is the primary recipient, and then the Colorado Agricultural Development Authority also gets a relatively small amount each year that they can use for a beginning farmer program that they run and other kind of related programs. Half of the allocation goes directly to local governments. The statute is written in an interesting way. You have to have enough population that you would get basically a full $1 million of PAB cap. So when you back into that, any local government that has at least 20,000 people in it right now would get a direct allocation. They would earn that $1 million minimum and get a direct allocation. Anything left over stays in the statewide balance and is administered by my office. So beginning of this year, we had 53 different local issuers who got direct allocations. Chafa gets a big share of the statewide pool, and the Ag Authority gets just 10 million. The statewide balance is at about 19 million, and that's a pretty typical amount. I'd say we start the year with anywhere between 16 to 19 million in the statewide balance once all those calculations are made. And you can go to our website. You can see the address here to see all of the direct allocations in the specific municipalities. So we have an annual timeline. We're on a calendar year basis for this program. My office puts out those allocation letters no later than January 15th of each year. And then the local governments and statewide authorities that receive a direct allocation, they have to decide what they want to do and act by September 15th. If they do nothing, then it automatically reverts to the statewide balance, and DOLA will handle getting that out to programs that can use it. But if you have a project that you want to use it for, you have to have a bond issuance planned, or you can carry it forward for up to 3 years. So if you're a municipality that has just barely $1 million each year, and you have a project that's going to cost $3 million, you could potentially carry forward your allocation for each of those 3 years and then accumulate enough to use for that project. Another option is to assign your allocation to a different issuer for an eligible person. And again, an issuer is another municipality or an authority such as a housing authority. We have great examples out there of local governments cooperating, especially county, city governments, that are working in the same region on projects. And so if you are a municipality that actually receives an assignment, you still have to act on that by the 15th. You have to either issue it or carry it forward, so on and so forth. So last year in September, this is how the pie chart kind of morphed. It looked a lot similar to the January 2018 at the start of the year, but then a number of municipalities assigned their cap to Chafa. A number of local governments hung on to their cap or assigned them to their housing authority, for example, Denver Housing Authority in the Denver area. And then let's see, if we started with roughly 50 million or roughly 20 million in the statewide balance, we had roughly 50 million that was relinquished back to the statewide balance on September 15th last year. So So basically, if you're looking at a project that needs more than you have in any one community, the first step is actually, and this particular slide is written from the perspective of that project developer. They would want to first identify who's going to issue the bonds. Is your local government comfortable with issuing the bonds? That's definitely an important issue to think through with a lot of factors that I'm not going to go to in any great detail today, but it's a choice. Let's leave it at that. It could be your areas, the city that the project is located in. It could be the county. Or it could be Chafa potentially. So Karen will talk more about the kinds of projects that they will work with you on. And then if there's not enough PAB cap available locally, the next step is to talk to your neighbors. If you're a city, talk to your county. If you're a county, talk to a city in the area that may also benefit from the project, whether or not it's within their boundaries, or even neighboring municipalities. And there's always the first option is we usually look at what's going on with the current year cap or fresh cap. So you got to figure out what to do with that by the 15th. So this can factor into that decision. It is also possible if a local government has carried forward cap that they could potentially delegate that to your project as well. So older cap can be an option as well. Chafa obviously gets a big supply of PABs at the beginning of each year, so they may be a resource. And if they are most likely the issuer for your project, obviously you're going to want to talk to them early. For all those other, the other avenues don't work out, then definitely talk to me at the Division of Housing, and we can talk about an application to the statewide balance. And this last point is specifically targeted to folks who are doing multifamily rental development. Those projects only need to cover 55% of their total development cost in order to be eligible for their 4% low-income housing tax credits. So we are asking all developers of affordable housing projects to try to just use the amount of cap that they need so that we have that resource left over for other projects. So if you are looking at a application to the statewide balance, we will entertain applications basically monthly, March through November. We have a small application fee to go along with that because we are a cash-funded program at the state level. We review these applications with an eye towards the same kind of underwriting we might apply to any loan or grant that DOLA DOH reviews. It's about an 8-week process and includes a hearing in front of the PAB allocation committee. And then you get an award letter, and unlike all the other programs that DOLA runs that do involve cash, there's no contracting process per se. You just get an award letter saying you now have the authority to issue this amount of private activity bonds. And so, we had talked about that September 15th deadline. Whatever's left over, whatever's relinquished to the statewide balance on September 15th is usually could be distributed through the October round, but then absolutely by November, because if we don't allocate it at that point, it would get lost. Projects either have to close by December 23rd or they have to be approved for carry forward. And then we have some small issuance fees on projects as they close, again, back to being a cash-funded program. So this is just some of the things we look for in more detail. The inducement resolution is a really important stage in the process of issuing tax-exempt bonds, it's a commitment by the issuer to actually issue the bonds for your project. And it signals, also signals the stage in the project's life where any expenses after that resolution date can be paid for by bond proceeds. So developers will definitely look to get that fairly early in their process. Definitely if we're looking at a PAB application from an area that gets a direct allocation, we're looking for participation from that local government with their own PAB allocation or maybe other resources if they have them. We look at market studies to make sure that projects are needed. And then also, if it's an affordable housing development, we like to see projects that go beyond the minimum requirements for what defines affordability in their eyes. So we look at project feasibility. I'm not going to go into too much detail here on this slide, but I think it's important to know that we see bond deals sized really pretty large range, typically 6 to 27. I probably should have just said rounded it to 30 million. But there are some programs that use a lot more, and there are some programs, especially like the Ag Authority's Beginning Farmer program, that are much smaller. But most are in this range of 6 to call it 30 million. And keep in mind that if you're looking at a rental housing project with a total development cost of say 12 million, you're maybe looking at a 50-unit project. So most of those developments are on the larger size. And this is just a listing of some of the projects that we have funded over the last couple of years. The ones that are in bold are, quote, air quotes, real affordable housing development projects. The ones that are not in bold are basically we have given awards to local governments and housing authorities that have a strong pipeline of projects that will get developed in the next 3 years. As the demand for PABs grow, I expect to see more, quote, real projects and less pipeline awards out of the statewide balance moving forward. Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that information. Truly appreciate that, Ann. At this point, I am going to pull up another presentation, and Karen is going to present that. So hang on one second, Karen.
Okay.
Hang on one second here. Okay. Karen, see if you can drive that PowerPoint. Yay!
Yay, okay. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to do a couple just quick commercials about Chafa because we are different than the Division of Housing. We were created in 1973 by the state to address the need for affordable housing. Although we're not a state agency, our board is appointed by the governor. We are a self-sustaining quasi-governmental agency where our authority was later expanded to support small business lending. And today our enabling legislation shapes all of our lending programs. We strengthen Colorado by investing in affordable housing and community development, and we envision that everyone in Colorado will have the opportunity for housing. Housing stability and economic prosperity. I put this in here and it's a little bit difficult to see, but it's definitely worth you taking a look at. Chafa provides housing programs to serve a wide range of income groups. If you overlay our business finance programs on top of our housing programs, many of the employees of the businesses we serve will fall someplace along this housing continuum. I want you to pay particular attention to the graph on the bottom, because if you're talking about workforce housing or affordable housing in your community, here's a great way to put a face on some of those people. You'll see where their income is based on the type of job that they have. As you can see, Chafa has contributed significantly to affordable housing and small business lending in Colorado, investing billions, creating thousands of new housing units, and assisting over 100,000 people to purchase their first home. So let's talk about the specific uses for private activity bonds. You heard all of the background information from Ann, but today we're going to focus on the uses for PABs. There's one option each to use PABs for multifamily housing and for small manufacturing, but there's 3 options to use it for single family housing. So what's the big deal about private activity bonds? It's a no-cost way for cities, towns, and counties to support affordable housing and economic development without having to write a check. This is hugely important when budgets are tight across the state. Ideally, we'd like local communities that receive this bonding PAB bond cap to take an active role in deciding how they want to use their allocation. As Ann talked about, do they want to assign it to another entity? Do they want to carry it forward, or do they want to relinquish it to the statewide balance? They can assign their bonding authority to a specific project in their community, or to another issuer like Chafa, or to a neighboring city or county. There are no cost options to the local issuers to do that assignment. The costs are borne by the actual issuer of the bonds, and you'll remember that from Ann's slide. The tax-free nature of the bonds creates a benefit not only for the bond investors, but ultimately for the underlying projects the bonds support. This is of no surprise to anyone, but our wages are not keeping pace with the cost of housing, and the available inventory is severely lacking, both on the rental and starter homeownership side. PABs is one way to help projects close that gap. So let's talk first about multifamily housing bonds. We typically see these projects having a minimum of 50 units. It's just not cost effective for small projects. Although frequently the projects are new construction, many are acquisition and rehab, generally serving families, seniors, or the general workforce. 2 recent projects that used PAB for acquisition rehabilitation were the senior project, the Manors 1 and 2 in Glenwood Springs, where Garfield County assigned their PAB to Chafa, and another project, Aspen Country Inn in Aspen. That was a workforce family project that used Chafa PAB because Pitkin County does not have their own allocation. The project developer could have also accessed the statewide balance to receive that PAB instead of coming to Chafa. There's multiple ways to finance affordable housing debt. Bank financing and credit enhancements are the most expensive and generally don't work as well as the sole funding source if there are restrictions on rent from any grant funding source. Typically, projects are financed using a combination of the financing tools shown on this slide. The soft funds, or grants, are mostly administered by the Division of Housing, but Chafa does have a limited pool of grant funds in the Housing Opportunity Fund. Chafa is the administrator of the Federal Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program in Colorado, also known as LIHTC. Chafa receives the equivalent of $1.25 per person each year to allocate through a highly competitive process known as the 9% competitive tax credits. This project is oversubscribed nearly 3 to 1. Selling those credits to investors results in as much as 70% of a project's equity. As both PAB and the 9% LIHTC program are both governed by Section 42 of the tax code, the 2 programs cannot be used together. The 4% non-competitive credits bring about 30% equity to a project and are frequently used with PAB as a funding source. To maximize the resources, the state tax credits are also used with the 4% PAB model to increase the equity for a project. If you're interested in learning more about tax credits, we'd be happy to do another webinar. And unfortunately, we have to talk a little bit about it here in order for the PAB funding to make sense. So what does this all look like? This diagram illustrates what we just talked about, pairing the PAB funding with the 4% non-competitive and state tax credits. In the left-hand conventional column, the debt in this example would likely come from a bank or a private lender. The owner would contribute about 30% of the project as their own cash and will likely charge market rate rents. In the right-hand column, the 9% LIHTC model, this is the ideal for most affordable housing projects. In this model, the sale of the tax credits provides more than 60% of the total cost as equity, with soft funds from grants and a limited amount of debt making up the rest of the capital stack. Because this model uses the lowest amount of repayable debt, the rents can be the lowest. The blend of these financing options is the middle column, where the 4% non-competitive tax credits are used, but they require more soft funds and also the state tax credits. The debt comes from the proceeds from the sale of the private activity bonds, which result in lower loan rates because of the tax-exempt nature of the bonds. Until the addition of the state tax credits, we saw much smaller utilization of this 4% non-competitive credits and PAB model because it required too much soft funding. The state tax credit program was a program from the early 2000s that sunsetted after a few years. In response to the floods in 2013, the legislature renewed their commitment to the program, which when combined with federal disaster recovery grants was critical to rebuilding housing in Boulder, Larimer, and Weld counties. This resource has proven to boost the number of new or refurbished affordable rental units exponentially, where you can see from the numbers on this slide. Senate Bill 18-007 is currently making its way through the legislature to continue this program through 2024. The bill is passed out of the Senate and should be heard in the House Finance Committee on March 19th. We're excited that CML is supporting this bill, as are many other housing and non-housing organizations. A little bit of background on LIHTC. Again, it's not a LIHTC training, but you need some of that to have this all make sense. LIHTC requires restricting units based on the income of the tenants and restricting the rents that can be charged. Rent restrictions limit how much hard debt a project can support. Think back to that 3-column slide that we previously saw, and that you need more affordable loans and grants in addition to the tax credits. The less debt you have, the lower the rents can be. The lowest income for the longest time is the underlying program requirement and preference not only for Chafa to award tax credits, but also for the Division of Housing to participate with soft funds. The population served by tax credit projects range from the lowest income individuals and families, like homeless or disabled, seniors, families, and the workforce. And a project can support a mix of these populations. The PAB proceeds can be used for construction loans only, or a construction loan that converts to a long-term permanent loan, or just a permanent loan. The use of the proceeds will determine the bond structure. No matter how the proceeds are used, the underlying loan made from the proceeds will be more affordable as there is no tax on the interest earned on the bonds. Some bond issues are privately placed with a bank or an investor, or they could be offered publicly. Each situation is different. If Chafa is the issuer, we don't buy the bonds, but we might serve as a permanent lender. Private activity bonds, like most other bonds, are challenging. Whereas as recent as 5 years ago, most private activity bonds were used for single-family housing. The pressure on the program for multifamily uses has greatly increased and in and of itself is competitive in nature. It is highly unusual to see a plain PAB deal without some kind of tax credits associated with it. The easiest way to use them for multifamily purposes is to assign the cap to an experienced local issuer like a housing authority or Chafa. They are expert at evaluating the deals to determine if the PAB financing brings enough benefits to the project to warrant the extra cost and technical expertise. There's a threshold size of about 50 units for a project to make financial sense. Okay, let's switch gears to single-family housing. There are 3 single-family uses for private activity bonds: mortgage loans for acquisition, mortgage credit certificates, and mortgage loans for energy improvements, which we won't focus on today as it's not currently used in Colorado. The IRS requires that any issuer offering a program using PABs must comply with these fundamental rules. Borrowers must be first-time home buyers, which means anyone who has not owned their primary residence for the past 3 years. Borrowers can be qualified veterans, which means someone who has had an honorable or general discharge. Less than honorably discharged veterans are ineligible for any VA housing benefits or PAB-related programs. Qualified veterans do not need to be first-time homebuyers. Programs must have income limits, which are based on a percentage of the HUD area median income, also referred to as AMI. These limits can go up to 115% of AMI adjusted for family size. Purchase price limits are generally set by what an eligible borrower at the maximum income limit can afford to buy. All programs must have funds set aside for use in targeted areas, which are census tracts or parts of census tracts that are economically distressed. These targeted areas typically have higher income and purchase price limits and do not require borrowers to be first-time homebuyers. Chafa generally has a first-time homebuyer program available. However, other local issuers may offer a program if they have excess or carry forward PAB that must be used. Any PAB-funded program is subject to recapture tax. This is the IRS's way to recapture some of the subsidy a borrower received. 3 things have to happen to trigger recapture, which is essentially the perfect storm. Borrowers must sell their home within 9 years, and they must have a gain on sale of their home adjusted for any improvements they made. And the borrower's income must have increased more than 5% per year adjusted for family size. So all of those things have to happen before someone is even eligible or potentially required to pay recapture tax. Since so few people are subject to it, and to eliminate the scariness of recapture tax, Chafa reimburses borrowers who have had to pay the tax. And for the 10 plus years we've been doing this, we've only reimbursed a handful of individuals. Another use for PABs in the single family arena are mortgage credit certificates, or MCCs. We call them the gift that keeps on giving. Generally, a borrower can take 20% of the mortgage interest they paid as a direct credit against their federal tax liability. The remaining 80% of the mortgage interest is still a deduction. And they can repeat this credit deduction model for as long as they live in the home as their primary residence. Most programs use that 20% credit amount, but this can be increased up to 50%, but it uses much more PAB and serves far fewer borrowers. MCCs cannot be used with a PAB-funded mortgage. Again, that's a double dipping of the tax benefit. Another reason we think of MCCs as the gift that keeps on giving is that the borrower can also refinance their original mortgage and get their MCC reissued as long as they continue to live in the house as their primary residence. A borrower could potentially use their MCC for up to 30 years if that was the term of their original mortgage. If the borrower does a cash-out refinance, the amount of the MCC is limited to the principal amount of their original mortgage, not the extra cash that they took out. A little-known feature about MCCs is that they can be used with manufactured homes not affixed to a foundation and considered chattel. Okay, let's move on to the third use of PABs, and this is industrial development bonds, or IDBs. They're also referred to as industrial revenue bonds, or IRBs. IDBs should be one of the first things an economic developer or local elected official thinks about when a small manufacturer wants to move to or expand within their community. It's not applicable for every business, but should be top of mind for manufacturing businesses. This is a resource that doesn't get used as much as it could, partially due to the restrictions in the tax code. Earlier, Ann spoke about the ability to carry forward PABs for housing for up to 3 years. The IRS makes it more difficult for IDBs. A local issuer can still carry forward PABs for IDB use, but it must be a named project ready to break ground within a year. And it's a use it or lose it, and it cannot be transferred to another project. A more efficient way would be to assign CAP to an entity like Chafa for no specific manufacturing purpose. And when an IDB project is ready in your community, you've already created that relationship with Chafa, and then Chafa can issue the bonds using its current year CAP. There are specific uses and restrictions for using IDBs for manufacturing projects. Acquisition of land or a building, construction or renovation of a building, and acquisition of machinery and equipment are the most frequent uses. There must be careful consideration and calculations about how much of the facility will be used for the actual manufacturing of goods versus how much of the building will be used for office or meeting space or retail space. Getting the balance correct is essential for project eligibility. A great example of businesses using IDBs that everyone is familiar with was the original construction of New Belgian Brewery. Your economic development team should be on the lookout for manufacturing businesses that are ready to grow their business or ready to own a building, as well as attracting new businesses. This could be an additional resource for Colorado Jumpstart manufacturing operations, especially if it's already an established business. Taxable bonds can also be issued for IDB ineligible uses, such as larger facilities or refinancing existing debt or acquiring additional machinery or equipment. Section 42 of the tax code limits the tax-exempt portion of an IDB to $10 million. Projects larger than that, or which need a larger percentage of office space or equipment, can use an additional $10 million in taxable bonds. Another part that can cause an issue for some manufacturers that have multiple facilities is the required $40 million aggregate for all locations. This is important if an existing company wants to expand to your community and have used IDBs in the past, or for companies that might want to expand because of the benefits of Jumpstart by creating a new location in a Colorado Jumpstart community. It doesn't prohibit them from coming to Colorado, it just might restrict the amount of IDBs they can use. Issuing bonds can be expensive, primarily due to the number of players required to put a deal together. Chafa can be the issuer, as well as cities or counties. It's not cost-effective to issue bonds for small projects, those less than $2.5 million, and Ann spoke about that a little bit on the housing side as well. As an alternative to fund those smaller projects, Chafa offers a mini bond program for deals less than $2.5 million. We use standardized documents from our bond counsel to reduce some of the legal fees by about 1/3. Similar to what we saw on the multifamily bond side, using tax-exempt bond proceeds to make a loan to a manufacturer lowers their monthly debt payments. Having experienced bond counsel is absolutely critical to making these projects a success. Here I'd like to plug the PAB Roadshow that the Division of Housing in Chafa does every summer, which includes a bond attorney. That attorney gets down into the weeds about the how-tos of bond financing. If you're interested in being invited to that event, please send Ann an email to get on the distribution list. We didn't have time today to include all of that deep dive into the bond things, but we can guide you to those resources if you want. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. If you want to just push the next slide. You may not be able to. Hold on, I can do it.
Nope.
Oh, there we go. I wanted to make sure that everyone has both Karen, your information, and Ann, and there's Ann's email address to get onto that list as well. What a great information. Thank you so much. It certainly was a lot of information. Again, the recording will be posted to the CML website as well as just the PowerPoint slides in case you want to just kind of take a look at some of those detailed numbers that was presented. So at this time, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the question box. Again, fantastic information. While you're typing those questions in, I have to give a plug to the CML Annual Conference, June 19 through 22nd. It's going to be in Vail this year. Registration is open. Super excited about it. The preliminary program has been released, so you'll see the variety of sessions that we'll be offering. It's pretty fantastic. So with that, I'm still not seeing any questions. I think that you all just did a great job explaining the details that you had to share. So we'll give it another minute, and we'll go from there. All right. Well, if you do have any questions, feel free to follow up directly with Karen and/or Ann. Again, their contact information is on the screen. Certainly appreciate all of your participation. If you need anything, feel free to give any one of us here at CML a holler, and hope you all have a really, really great day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.